Well, welcome everyone. Hope everyone's been having a fantastic under one sky so far. I must admit I did get some sleep last night, but I did wake up this. I did get out last night and saw the moon, which was beautiful. So, drop a little note in the chat. Let us know where you're joining us from, and we're really excited for this workshop and this conversation. Where we're looking at something slightly different. We kind of titled this "Beyond the Streetlight." How we light the modern light and night. And really the context of this in the dark sky movement over the last 38 years, there's clearly been a lot of discussion about a whole variety of things. And in terms of solutions and the impact a lot of the focus has, I candidly say has been around public lighting and particularly around street lighting. And today in the next hour or so, we wanted to broaden the lens and say, look at, I would say some novel sources of light pollution. We're certainly going to be looking at those, but we're also going to be looking at things that have been with us for a long period of time, like car headlights, and really starting to explore and understand the impact of these. I'm really grateful for our three incredible panelists and experts to join us today. And our goal is really not just to catalog the problems, but really to understand the connections and how different types of light sources really shape the night and our experience of the night and all the impacts that it has, and explore the science and really start to understand how we can move ahead and move forward in terms of the simple solutions that come to bear. Our format for the next hours, I'm going to introduce I'll introduce our three panelists. Each of our panelists will have about 5 minutes. We'll explore each of those initial themes, and then we'll open it for a roundtable discussion with our panelists, and then we'll leave plenty of time at the end for Q&A. So if you have questions that come up, please use the Q&A function that is at the bottom of your Zoom window, the little handy question mark in a box that says Q&A below. Drop your questions in there. Use the chat for just internal chat. Oh, I hadn't thought about that. What do you want to say? But we'll pull questions at the end from that Q&A. So without further ado, I'm going to briefly introduce our three panelists, and then we'll dive right in. So we're going to begin our conversation with Dr. Jolan Troskianko, whose work examines how animal vision and behavior affected by artificial light. He's a visual ecologist. I had the pleasure of meeting at the CIE midterm conference in Vienna, and he was a room full of vision science people just discussing human vision and making the comment about actually we visual ecologists think about bat vision and moth vision in a very different way than you're thinking about human vision. So he brings a really interesting perspective for this, including the work that he and Kevin Gaston, who's on our board, have started to do looking at the impact of vehicle headlights. He's joining us today from Exeter in the UK, where he's at the University of Exeter. Next, we're going to move to what I would truly say is a novel source of light pollution. This is reflected light, directly beamed sunlight down from orbit by companies, emerging satellite companies. We're joined by Dr. Sam Lawler, who's been working extensively on the impacts of satellite constellations. I am fortunate to know Sam from our joint work on one of the American Astronomical Society's committees looking at these impacts. She's joining us from the University of Regina up in Canada. And finally, we're going to come back down to earth with Dr. Chris Kaiba. Chris is a wonderful individual. He was very generous about a decade ago. He spent a period of time on the International Dark Sky, now Dark Sky Association's Dark Sky International's board. He is a Canadian, but has been practicing his work for many years in Germany, looking at research to quantify the various sources of urban sky glow. He and Connie Walker co-authored a paper a couple of years ago from the work that he's been doing with Globe at Night, the Citizen Science Project, looking at the accelerating growth of light pollution globally. That's a really seminal paper there. He's going to be talking today about another citizen science project he's done with people to look at tracking and understanding different sources of light pollution down here on the ground. He was recently appointed the professor of nighttime light remote sensing at the Institute of Geography in the Ruhr University in Bochum in Germany. So we're going to dive right in with Jolyon. So Jolyon, I start with a brief personal story. The first time I had heard about light pollution was actually when I was at a research committee meeting when I was running an organization called Save the Redwoods League. And a question was asked about the impact of vehicle headlights in redwood groves along the Redwood Highway. And I remember the discussion very clearly. It was like, oh, that's interesting. I wonder if anyone's looked into that. And then we moved on. So I'm very fortunate that you're going to join us, because it turns out you have looked into that and are looking into that. So I think every conversation I have, it seems people are talking about headlights. They're getting brighter, they're getting bluer. People are complaining about their ability to see at night if they hit you as you're driving or walking down a road. So what are we learning? What's happening here, and what are we learning about these headlights and how they're affecting animal movements and behavior?
Cool, thank you. Yeah, as you said, this is a source of light that's been around for ages, but it's so different to other light sources. When we think of most artificial light, we think of street lights, but actually, so what vehicle headlights? They're pulsed, so they, through time and space, you've got this vehicle moving through, creates these intense pulses, which is very different. And this difference, who knows what the differences are that are caused by that? So we can explore. They're horizontally focused. And the focusing means that they can travel maybe 10 times further than an equivalent intensity of street light. So at the point at which it goes down to 1 lux might be 100 meters away from a car, whereas that's 10 meters away from a street light. That's a light level that will have effects. But also horizontal, animals normally look horizontally. If you think about a moth, a bird, many animals, their eyes are shielded from downwelling light because sun, moon is bright. You don't need to see it normally. You need to see the ground and the things horizontally. So light coming from a horizontal direction can be much more problematic, and insanely more intense. So an order of magnitude or two more intense than most static lights. So 2 to 8,000 lux, but that was 7 years ago, modern cars. Now well over 10,000 lux often, compared to a street light of 10 to 20 lux. So the intensity is off the scale. This focusing is very different. Spatially pervasive as well. So in the UK, road networks, the area covered by roadside verges in the UK is more than twice as much as natural and semi-natural grassland in the country. So this makes up, a big portion of our space for biodiversity. And as you mentioned, they're getting bluer, shortwave rich, and we know that blue light is problematic. And it's a growing problem because vehicle use is increasing all the time across the world, but even in developed places. So what do we know, getting sort of to the key issue here as an ecologist, what do we know about how vehicle headlights actually affect biodiversity? Short answer, very little. Verging on not quite nothing, but so little research has been done on vehicle headlights as opposed to more kind of conventional static sources of artificial light. So we don't understand this dose dependence. How many pulses of light, how intense are they? What is it like to be an animal affected by this? So we can't extrapolate. There's been a lot of work into artificial light lately, but we really can't extrapolate this confidently to vehicle headlights. But there's many reasons why we should worry about this. So there's this amazing survey in the UK called the Bugs Matter, where they measure the number of bugs splattered on vehicle license plates at the front. And in a 3-year period between 2021 and 2024, I think with about 25,000 samples or more, they showed a 63% decline in the numbers of flying insects. On roads, that means there's roadside verges, this habitat where insects are important. There's correlative, we don't understand the thing, but there's reason to believe that insect declines are massive and we need these insects to pollinate the food that we eat. Now it gets interesting though, the mechanisms. So we have reason to worry from correlative ecological data, but now the mechanisms are fascinating. Imagine that you're driving along the road and you're hit by the glare of an oncoming vehicle. Your pupil can constrict in about half a second and then dilate in another half a second. So in about a second or two, it's really annoying, it's unpleasant, but your eye as a vertebrate can respond very quickly. Now imagine you're a moth though, it's completely different. And in most other insects, the pupillary response in a moth involves moving of pigment molecules in and out of different bits of the eye. And that's a process that can take 10 to 15 minutes. And our own research is showing that just a single or small number of pulses simulating vehicle headlights, just a few of these things, an insect that is by this roadside, subject to a few cars passing, it can start this process of losing their nighttime adapted vision. So this means that 10, 15 minutes later, they will be effectively blind at night. So their eyes go from this dark adapted state to pupils constricted equivalent and blind at night. The really worrying thing is how long it takes for them to recover that vision. So it could be over an hour. We're starting to not be able to measure how long it takes. It might even be for the rest of the night in some cases. And now consider that many adult insects only live for a few days, and they might only be active for an hour or two a night. Now you're starting to think that these sublethal effects, it's not killing the insect, but it's stopping it going about its business if it becomes blinded. So there's reason to believe, we don't know that this is happening, but there's reason to believe that the mechanisms that headlights could play with could really be causing significant harm to, this is thousands of species of moth, that they're the food stuff for birds. So the pest control mechanism for free that we get from birds depends on the caterpillars of moths and so on. And they're big pest species, they're big pollinators. So the impact of biodiversity could be large. We've done other research as well to test how a moth responds when it's simulated, when we blast it with a simulated headlight pulse, same intensity and duration as a vehicle headlight, but we change the spectrum of the light. We found that these modern bluer shifted ones, compared to a fairly standard LED, not super yellow, just a normal kind of warm LED versus a cold white LED. 80% more incidence of harmful behavior from those moths with that bluer source. So this was either flying towards the light or this erratic behavior that would be harmful for them. So yeah, that's a kind of background of some of the harms that we've noted, and there's lots of reason to worry about this.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you've made tremendous progress here in a short period of time, and I want to sort of maybe turn now to the other side of this, right? Clearly, if you're the individual driving down a dark road at night, the headlights are what enables you to see the deer running across the road or the cyclist, right? So, how do you think? What does your research suggest about the trade-off between the safety for the driver and the safety for wildlife, and I'd probably extend that even to the pedestrians out there, the people who are not anyone else, any living thing outside the vehicle, as it were.
Yeah. I would say we don't have the evidence at the moment. Of course, I mean, the reason why we have these powerful headlights is to illuminate the way, but we're really lacking data on how it actually affects your true safety versus your perceived safety versus the actual and perceived safety of pedestrians. For example, it's very difficult to get data with oncoming headlights. You're more likely to be involved in a collision with the person, or you're more likely to cause them glare and hit the side of the road. I was cycling home not long ago and got hit by a car. I was cycling and it hit me on my bike. And the driver said that the car behind me was just too bright. The glare of the headlights, the driver couldn't see. This was an old driver. And this is a really acute issue for particularly older people who have whose vision is more affected by glare than ours. So we don't have the data. We know that brighter headlights can be maybe good for spotting a deer a long way away, but will certainly be bad for other road users, might be bad for pedestrians, will almost certainly be bad for nature. How we balance these things, I can't say because I'm not doing the right research to do that, but it is super important to address.
Yeah. Well, before we pass on to Sammy, I'm curious to kind of go to the sort of next level in terms of the technological policy changes. I understand you share that you're doing the work research on one end, you don't have all the evidence. It strikes me actually there was a hearing in I think in the House of Commons, maybe in the UK this week or last week, starting to look at this issue. This issue is starting to be raised. So if a policymaker called you up and asked for what's one change, either technologically or policy related, that you would recommend that could quickly reduce the ecological harm from headlights, presumably whilst maintaining the safety, what would you suggest, given what you understand at this point?
Yeah, really interesting. Based on our own work, making sure that we reduce. So the work that I mentioned with 64 species of moth, over 100 replicates. The fact that slightly bluer LED headlights caused 80% more harmful behavior, that would be an easy one. That, make sure we don't go too blue shifted would be one. But generally stopping any perceived arms race between vehicle manufacturers of ever brighter, headlights. But yes, but we really, as I say, we need more evidence because this is just moths, whereas actually there are many other aspects of ecology that are likely being affected.
Well, thanks for this great start. We'll bring back to integrate these ideas later. I'm going to move on and invite Sam up to moving from horizontally intense beams coming from vehicles to actually what's happening, what's been proposed from space, which maybe is the polar opposite of this, which is horizontal beams coming directly down from low Earth orbit at illuminating large areas. So Sam, can you tell us a little bit about what is being proposed by some of these new satellite companies that feels very futuristic at this point, but is moving ahead very quickly? So what's at stake for astronomy? You're an astronomer, but what's at stake for everyone who cares about the nighttime environment?
Yeah, so yeah, hi from Canadian Treaty 4. Thanks for having me. And so I'm sure everyone, how many of you here, there's a little hands up, how many of you here have seen a satellite moving across the sky? Right. Okay, everybody's seen satellites, right? Like this is something that's very easy to see in my dark prairie skies. It's very easy to see in my telescope research data from around the world. Right. So I've been worrying about this for quite a while, but now there's this new uh, it sounds completely unhinged when I describe this, but there's a tech company in California that has filed with the FCC to launch the first of thousands of giant mirrors into orbit to reflect sunlight down on us in order to power solar panels at night. And so the very first one that they're planning to launch that they have put out the specifications for, it will be 4 times brighter than the full moon, but like a point source. So if you look at it with binoculars or a telescope, you could actually damage your eyes. But the amount of light that's actually getting down to the ground, when you actually calculate how much it's reflecting, it's in the milliwatt range. So like you can't run solar panels on moonlight, right? Like so it's just in order to actually deliver this service of sunlight from orbit at night, they need hundreds or thousands of these mirrors all pointed at the same spot. But they're in low Earth orbit, so they move across the sky at the same speed as Starlink satellites, which you've all seen, right? So it would be this like a string of 4 times brighter than the full moon lights moving across the sky, all pointed at the same spot, and then they shift off to point at the next paying customer. It's completely nightmarish, right? Solar power is great. It's great. It's great to think about ways to get more clean energy, right? But we have batteries. We like this is such a classic case of tech bros trying to solve a problem without having the right background and with zero consultation, like none. These giant mirrors in orbit huge light pollution issues, right? They go so far on their website as to say this is not light pollution because it's natural sunlight. So there's some huge misconceptions that are happening here. Um, I so many people here study all of the ecological issues caused by light pollution, which this is indeed light pollution. Um, uh, and So yeah, I can only imagine how many issues this would cause to have 4 minutes of 4 times brighter than the full moon light shining on a spot. Like, what is that going to do to circadian rhythms in animals and plants? And there's all sorts of human safety issues just because, what happens if you're driving a car and one of these shines on you and you lose your night vision, right? What happens if you're flying a plane? Eh, this is, of course, huge issues for astronomy research, right? You can't see stars when the full moon is up, so we can't do astronomy research when any of these satellites are above the horizon. And it's a giant thing in low Earth orbit, which is the most crowded part of orbit. So it is going to collide with stuff. So it's just, there's huge, huge issues here. So how do we stop this? The only way to stop this is lots and lots of public outcry because the only federal agent, they only have to get approval from one US federal agency, that's the FCC, and the FCC has explicitly stated as of this week that they are a licensing assembly line, so they're just going to approve it. So I'm so sorry, everybody. We have another thing to fight. um, and yeah, so that's my background here. Ruskin, what else should I talk about?
Well, I'm just curious. Many times we've been working on this satellite issue for 6 years since I think, but many of us were very surprised when the first Starlink launched. Like there was that aha moment. There was a moment of maybe first wonder, and then there was the slow, well, quick realization of what this was going to mean. So I'm curious, given what surprised you about this proposal?
Um, it's just it's just amazing to me that one tiny company in California can change the night sky for everyone in the world dramatically with no way to fight it effectively, right? Like there's not even like the FCC hasn't even opened up a public comment period on this, right?
Because the
Like there's
government's closed down at the
nothing.
moment.
Yeah, because the government's closed down at the moment, but they didn't open it up before. So yeah, I don't even know what's happening with that. So yeah, the fact like how easy it is for one company to do something like this is that is surprising and terrifying.
Yeah. So maybe we could look at how how's the astronomical community, both we're both part of the American Astronomical Society and the International Astronomy Union. So what discussions are ongoing? What sort of policy or international coordination steps are underway and are being taken to prevent projects like this setting a very dangerous precedent?
Yeah, yeah, and yeah, I should mention like so Reflect Orbital has, filed to do this. They're one company, but it just shows that like lots of companies could do this, right? And if they are successful at all, which I don't see how they're going to be successful, but if they make any money at all, someone else will also try to do this, right? So, yeah, so we're trying to figure out what to do, right? So this is one of those issues that like astronomers have noticed. This is a big problem, but like we really need help from other groups of scientists. We need bird ecologists. We need people who study plant circadian rhythm. We need everybody. We need all the scientists to talk about what a terrible idea this is. Like we can't have this. There are other ways to get solar power at night. There's much better solutions than this, with way fewer ecological issues. So we need a lot of public outcry. That's what we need now.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more on that. I think that there is very much about having people realize this is much more than of concern to astronomers. This is a concern to anyone, whether you care about the view of the night sky or not. So this is about the health of our planet and what we're doing to the environment as a whole. There's some questions in the chat about how do we contact the FCC about this project. So certainly for Dark Sky, when this project opens for public comment, we will certainly be in touch with everyone, let them know how they can engage and how we can use these examples, these projects as emblematic of the problem that's going on here and the broad base of concern that needs to be expressed to ensure that these things are stopped and we look at other ways of solving our energy needs around the world. So thanks for everything you're doing, Sam. Thanks for joining us. Look forward to the continuing discussion here today. So now I'm going to bring Dr. Chris Khyber. Chris and I were both at the Allen conference last week in County Mayo. It was fantastic to see you there in person, Chris. Um, you have done incredible work over your career to sort of engage citizens, just ordinary individuals around the world in really understanding what's going on in the nighttime environment. So can you tell us a little bit about the project that you launched a couple of years ago, rather than having people look up and count stars, which is what you're known for with the Globe at Night project, actually getting people to go to walk along walk along streets. So tell me a little bit about the project, what people did, what you learned about it, and if there were any sort of aha moments that came out of that for you.
Sure. Thanks, Ruskin, and hello, everybody. I'm going to start actually a little bit behind for sort of why we wanted to do this in the first place. So when you fly at night, I think probably many or maybe more likely most people in the chat or in the group right now have probably had the experience of flying over cities at night. And when you look down, you see all these streets that are illuminated, and so you get the impression that, street lights are what makes light at night. And that makes sense. That's what it looks like. But really, literally every single study except for one that has ever tried to quantify how much of the light comes from streetlights, either directly upward or else is contributing to sky glow, has found that they were half or less than half of the total light, usually less than half. And that's in cities, I should specify. And even the one paper that did find that the streetlights were responsible for more than half of the light, that was a before and after comparison with a retrofit. And after the change, the streetlights were again responsible for less than half the light. So this goes back a long time. I'm just going to post in the chat here a study from the US War College from 1943. There was a problem that the sky glow from cities on the eastern seaboard in the US and also into the land a little bit were causing sky glow. And the German U-boats were able to see US merchant marine ships, even though they were running dark, silhouetted against the sky glow. And then they would shoot at them. So the War College wanted to understand what causes sky glow. The same sort of question you're asking me now. um, and the difference is, during the war, 1943, they could do things like go to a town and say, okay, now we turn off all the shop windows, and everybody did it. Okay, now you turn the shop windows on, everybody jump in your car and turn the car lights on, and they did that, right? So it's the kind of thing that we can't really do in peacetime, but they did back then. So of course things have changed over, 80 years since they did that study, and things will always change. So we have to keep on revisiting this. Um, One of the things that we know about sky brightness in particular is that in the early evening, pretty well everywhere in the world, it decreases quite rapidly, about 5 to 10% per hour. So that's clearly not streetlights because they're typically on the whole night. So the question is, well, what's causing that? What's there in the early evening that's not there later? So this trying to understand, what makes up the light we see from satellites was kind of the background to this project called Nachtlichter. It's a German word. It means nighttime lights. And we had developed this app together with citizen scientists to allow people to walk down the street and count up lights. And we covered really, really huge areas in order to be able to make comparisons to data from satellites. What we found is very similar to the other studies. Streetlights were around about, in any context, about 10% of the total number of light sources that we counted. And that doesn't mean they make 10% of the light, right? Because a street light puts out a lot more light than, for example, a little garden decoration light. We're just talking strictly the counts here. Um, The most common light source that anybody saw was windows from people's houses. So those, particularly in the early evening, are the most common light source there is. These shine sideways, right? Which is, as we heard before at the start, that's the particularly bad direction for sky brightness. And they're not as bright as streetlights, but there's just a huge amount of them. And they turn off over the course of the night. We could also see that in our data. So the car headlights and the street lights car headlights and the windows from people's houses may actually be a very important component of the total part of light pollution that contributes to sky glow in the early evening. So say 6 o'clock till about 10 o'clock at night. when we get into urban areas, what we see is that in Germany, at least, for every street light, there is one illuminated shop window and one illuminated sign. Now, again, these things are shining sideways, and there, as in the early evening especially, there are as many of them as there are streetlights. And shop windows and signs are now they are quite bright compared to streetlights in some cases. And like we said, they shine in a poor direction. So I want to post in the chat, together with our citizen science team, we made sort of a question and answer file that's made for people that don't have an academic background. I've just posted it. If you want to learn about what we did and why we did it, written in a way not in a scientific publication, but written for anybody with sort of high school level education, check that out, and you can see what we did and why. So I hope, Ruskin, that I answered your question.
Yeah, I mean, it was fascinating. I mean, when I joined Dark Sky, 7 years ago with the staff, we used to, a lot of conversations about what's the single biggest source of light pollution, and the answer was always we don't actually know. And the work that you and Jolyon are starting to do is starting to put some more substance behind that, right? But at the
Yeah,
same time,
if I could
yeah, go
briefly
on.
mention one other
Yeah.
point that's behind this. It's exactly related to your question. Um, You mentioned this study that we did with Globe at Night, looking at this sky brightness, how many stars people could see. And in order to explain the decrease in stars that people can see, we would need an increase in sky brightness of about 10% per year in North America, a little bit less in other parts of the world. When we look with satellites, we don't see increases that are that quick. So what that suggests is that well, there could be several reasons for why this is. Spectrum is part of it, but it might be that the biggest contributor to the light that's producing sky glow and the light that's producing light in the satellites is changing between the two. So we may be seeing, for example, a shift from streetlights being quite important to becoming somewhat less important. And for example, maybe these brighter car headlights or an increase in advertising or also sort of vanity lighting for houses, for churches, for other buildings. That may be increasing more rapidly than street lighting. It's quite possible. We don't know that for sure yet. But again, this is partly why we want to do these inventories to understand, okay, what was there at the moment.
So it's clear from your data, as you just alluded to, like we're in a sense we're still losing ground on this issue, and we might not know the precise areas, and people like you and others are doing more work on it to really help understand that. But given the uncertainties that are out there, what are the levers that we could start using to reverse these trends?
Yeah, I have to say one thing that's been a little disappointing in this work is it makes you quite pessimistic, right? So when you go back and look at that U.S. War College paper from 1943, one thing that's wild, they had an idea about trying to get headlights to not light up the sky, so they made these things that would, when the car went up a hill, it would tilt downward. And to some extent, we have things like that in Europe, although it doesn't quite work that same way. But when you look at the recommendations, it's basically what we say today. Only light where it's needed, turn lights off when they're not needed, and don't shine light up into the sky directly. So since 1943, we've known the solution. To be fair, there has been population growth and cities have become larger in the meantime, but the rate of sky brightness has been faster than the rate of population growth. So yes, we're losing, and I don't have the answer for how to fix it. I have become very pessimistic about the idea that education fixes it because we've been doing education for years and years. Where you do see a really big change in the satellite data is France. France has become far darker in recent years. They passed a national light pollution law in 2017. And since that period, it's become a lot darker, particularly because of the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the energy crisis in Europe that came about after that. A lot of cities, it expanded. There was already a lot of French communities that were turning streetlights off late at night. So could be 11 till 5 or 6 in a small town, might be 1 o'clock till 4 in the morning in a big city. But that has really been supercharged since the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And now about 1/3 of all of the communities in France turn streetlights off late at night. So this is something that clearly is entirely possible, right? If you haven't heard about a massive increase in traffic collisions in France, or massive numbers of homes being broken into, it's because you know what? In residential areas, turning the streetlights off late at night doesn't matter, other than reducing light pollution. So we'll
Save
see
money.
whether this expands, but that's the one sort of place that is
Yeah.
absolutely bucking the trend of the rest of the world is France right now.
So Chris, as we kind of close this section, I mean, you've done a lot of work with sort of this crowdsourcing of scientific data and using open data. What are your thoughts about using that approach to empower communities to pinpoint and fix their worst sources of wasted light? And as you say, ultimately say, sort of build the support for moving from awareness and education to action. Because I agree with you, like education gets you so far, but in the end of the day, what we need is action.
So I'm gonna post in a little bit when we're not talking, the link to the Radiance Light Trends webpage. Some of you also know lightpollutionmap.info. They're both run by Yuri Stair. We produced that to help people see how light is changing over time. So you can use something like that to find bright light sources in your area. And the Montmegantic, you'd have to help me, Ruskin. I can't remember if they're a reserve or a park, but in any case, an
They're a
international
reserve.
dark sky
The first
place, a
reserve.
reserve. Okay,
First reserve.
the first reserve, Montmegantic, when they were in the process, or else shortly after they became a dark sky reserve, they used the satellite data to find particularly problematic emitters, and then they went to them and they talked to the business owners. And there was, for example, a sawmill that had these 250-watt mercury lights, they were old and they were probably a lot less bright than they were originally. And they swapped them out for full cutoff, I think at the time, high pressure sodium lights. Made the vision on that sawmill a lot better. But because they were no longer tipped up, it helped hugely for the sky brightness. And they did this all over the place, all around the park. And they showed that the sky brightness at the observatory reduced by, I don't remember how much it was, something like 30%. But they really did have a big win through this action. So if you don't necessarily have to keep a detailed record of all of the stuff in your city. If you drive around and you see something that looks particularly bad, it's possible to go and talk to the business owner, hopefully in a non-confrontational way. Don't barge down the door and break things. But if you go and talk to them and say, look, I've looked at a lot of businesses around. You seem to be out of step. Here are these things that you could do to avoid glare, for example, or things like this. Yeah, you could also, I don't know if this has been tried, but you could try going to the Chamber of Commerce and being like, hey, lots of these companies here are doing great. Maybe they could do more, but this one is really odd. They seem to be off. Could you maybe talk to them and we're trying to get our community to have more more standardized use of light. It's in the best interest for everybody. Who knows? I don't know if that would work or not, but could be something worth trying. So yeah, you look at the satellite data, drive around, find the bright things, and then feel free to talk to people. It sometimes works.
Yeah.
I'll say it that way.
Well, it's good, Chris, for you to end on an optimistic note, despite the pessimism that you shared earlier. I mean, that's our belief that here's an issue that can be solved and resolved simply, and the only thing you lose is bad lighting in the process. So now I wanted to invite both Sam and Jolyon up as well, so sort of have an integrated discussion. I kind of wanted to start off. Happy for whoever wants to take this first. We've talked about headlights to cities to satellites. Light is literally coming from every direction. So what's the connection of these issues? What is the connection points here, and how do you think this should this, or how does it change the way we think about light pollution?
Aimed at anyone in particular?
Anyone, just jump in and pass it on.
I mean, how do we unify all of these sources? How do we come up with a joined up perspective on all of this? I mean, Chris's point, just reiterating, just don't have lights where you don't need them. Clearly, from my angle, we just need a lot more research into the ecological side. But every ecologist would always say that it's it's really annoying cop out. So we need the cautionary approach. We need to we assume with these massive insect declines. So this is we've got enormous insect declines, and we depend massively on insects for so much of the basic ecological services on which we all depend. The functioning of the planet itself depends on insects to a large degree. So it's in all of our interest to do this. How much will education work? I don't know. That's a terrifying point from Chris that, education, how far can we go with that? I don't know, because ecologists have been banging on about this, massive loss of biodiversity, this crisis that we have going on at the same time as climate change. And it seems like a no-brainer. Electricity for lighting is very expensive, and it's causing harm. So yeah, I don't know. Should we become pessimists or should we become activists? I don't know.
Sam, anything to add or
I I was also very a little unhappy to hear Chris's comment about education's not working. Like, oh no, because that's what I was gonna say. Education. Because this is just people not seeing the connections, right? Like the way that engineering in particular is taught is like you focus on this one problem and you solve this one problem, right? Oh, we need more electricity at night. Shine a giant light from orbit, it's perfect. But like there's no there's no breadth, right? Like they're not seeing the big picture. So I was gonna say education, and I still have hope. I still have hope that education is the right way to go. And I know Dark Sky, everybody here, you're doing great work. So like keep talking to people. Like it does eventually make a difference. It just takes a while. So yeah.
If I can just maybe clarify, I'm not saying that we shouldn't educate people. So if anybody misunderstood me there, which I can appreciate, I may have been clumsy the way I phrased that. But I do want to make something really clear, which is that what we are doing, Dark Sky International, what activists are doing, what the CIE is doing, is not working. So we know this. It is not working. Light is growing at a faster rate than population and has been for at least since World War II. There were some decreases in light in World War II. There's also massive decreases in Ukraine. That is not the kind of solution we want. Blackouts because of war is not a solution, right? But what we've been doing has not been working. And so we should continue to educate people, absolutely. But it's also time to consider that something has to change. And in CIE in particular, I think we need to work with them to really make much more clear the obtrusive light guidelines. I don't remember when the first one is from, 1983 or something, has not worked. They have been there. It has not worked. We still have obtrusive light. It's getting worse. And I think that we should be really clear about that while we should continue pushing, and maybe if we hadn't been pushing, we hadn't been educating, it would be even worse. Surely it would be. What we're doing is somehow not enough. And that's sort of the call to action. So try everything.
Yeah. So I want to move, but like I think one of the common threads here, like we're talking about sort of technological progress and innovation, cars, LEDs, and satellites. Each one is solving one problem and introducing others. To Sam's point, that we need a little bit more joined up thinking here if we can. Each of these has introduced new environmental costs. I mean, the classic one that people talk is Jevons paradox with the LEDs. Light has become so cheap, you just use more and more and more. Right. So I mean, as a movement, how do we ensure that innovation, because surely there'll be more innovation to come, let's hope so, but includes darkness as a design value? How do we get to that place?
Darkness as a design value is fascinating because we're diurnal animals, and you know, we're so much of us is built to be afraid of the dark. You know, think of most horror films; they're all focused on the dark. Dark is, you know, is so much of this cultural indoctrination, but also our evolutionary history would imply that we're very diurnal animals. So you've got a lot to overcome there to make people embrace the night. Particularly, as Chris's research has pointed out, we can't see the stars anymore for most people. Yeah, that aspect of education, this love of being out there at night is fascinating. And me as a biologist, I've been absolutely stunned because I've only in the last few years converted to kind of nighttime ecology. It's amazing how few biologists throughout the history of, you know, ecological research have done work at night. I can just send my undergraduates out to do basic ecology work in rock pools nearby or in the fields. And they are doing cutting edge research that no one has done before because no one could be bothered to be up at night. You know, this is, we are just so focused on this diurnal world. And there's such rich pickings to be out at night and see the world in a completely different way. You go to rock pools at night and they're utterly different to in the daytime. It's amazing.
I'm glad you said that. I mean, the joke I have is like if you're thinking about getting a PhD in ecology, just study something that's been studied during the day and night, and you're going to get it right. And you know, actually, Kevin shared with me, you know, with a sort of a wry chuckle, the people who've been, I think, out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean looking at the large scale migration of things up and down the water column. So they had been doing this in boats with lights on it because they needed the lights to get around. So they're fundamentally not studying what they thought they were studying, right? So you know, come back to the question, like Sam, Chris, like how do you think we start to ensure that innovation includes darkness as a design value from the start, rather than just something that we can ignore and wipe away?
So, I mean, there's this concept called an environmental Kuznets curve. It's contested about whether it really works or not. But when you look, for example, at sulfur dioxide emissions in wealthy countries, so industrializing countries, there was a period where, as the United States, as the UK, as Canada became more wealthy, they produced more sulfur dioxide emissions, and there was a linear sort of relationship there. We burned stuff in order to make energy, and to produce anything you needed energy, and so we just kept on making more and more pollution. But at some point, acid rain became such a cause, and people were so concerned about it that something was done about it. And now, for a unit of production in the UK or Canada or the US, we produce far less sulfur dioxide emissions. One of the criticisms of this environmental Kuznets idea is that actually, well, a lot of that emissions got shipped off to Southeast Asia. So, you know, didn't quite go away. But on the other hand, it has been successful. And so the idea would be that maybe it turns out that at first, as society industrializes and becomes wealthier, it produces more and more light. But at some point, people say, this is dumb, this is unacceptable. And at some point, we can continue going further and we start to spend the money on design, for example, to design for darkness. And we start coming down that curve. So for each more unit of production that we have, we actually produce less light in total. So it is entirely possible to imagine that future, but it depends on people saying, no, this is enough. No, we don't accept this. And so, yes, education, I said it's not enough maybe, but I mean, if that becomes the point where people just say, no, this is not acceptable, something has to be done, it's possible to imagine that it could be done.
Yeah, and yeah, just to build on that, I think an important key here that nobody really wants to talk about, but is really important, is international regulation, right? Like we absolutely need this. Um, Absolutely is needed in orbit, right? Like we're just like Starlink is doing a collision avoidance maneuver every 2 minutes because orbit is so crowded, and they're still launching more, right? Like I went to a conference last year that was put on by the UN Office of Outer Space Affairs, and it was a whole bunch of satellite builders and operators and me, which was kind of awkward, but it was interesting. And all the satellite operators and builders there, they want international regulation too. They know the situation in orbit is dangerous and needs international regulation. And the UN Office of Outer Space Affairs said, "Oh, we don't enforce regulations. We just, suggest them." Like, so like we really do. We need these regulations. They need to be enforced. But how? I'm a lowly astronomer. That's what we need.
So that's a perfect segue, Sam, to where I kind of wanted to take us next. It's like, how can lowly astronomers and lowly ecologists, or highfalutin ecologists and astronomers and others and engineers and advocates and policymakers work together to translate what we know into standards and public understanding? And I kind of add to that, like, how do we avoid well, it's still being studied and we don't know all the answers as an excuse for policymakers say, well, it's not ripe yet to make any decisions.
Wait, sorry, were you going to
sorry.
talk, Chris? Go on.
I mean, why not just, if I may say something, a lot of people are angry about them. They don't like that, this race to the bottom, getting brighter and brighter. People recognize that. So it's possible to imagine a situation in which people say enough is enough. This can't go on like this. The for It's probably an unpopular opinion, but we know you had mentioned Jevons paradox. As light becomes cheaper, people use more of it. The obvious solution then is if light became more expensive, people would use it more carefully. That's really clear. And the beautiful aspect of that solution is that it preserves individual choice in a way that many other forms of regulation don't. So you're not saying you can't put a big light up on your house. You're just saying you're going to pay a lot more for it. I can't imagine that this is actually going to be successful. Carbon taxes were a really good idea. They were hugely unpopular, but this is the regulatory solution that preserves the most freedom, is not to ban anything, but just to say, go ahead, but you know what? There's going to be a big tax on light bulbs, and there's going to be a increase in the cost of electricity at night. Everybody would hate you for it, but that would be the most effective way actually to regulate light pollution, in my opinion. And you see that for example, in France, with the decrease in light is directly related to cost issue of the energy.
I mean, it's the same idea in orbit. It's real cheap to launch stuff into orbit. So so why not put giant mirrors in orbit? Why not put AI data centers in orbit? Let's just do everything in orbit, right? So yeah, I agree with your cost idea there.
I think sort of closer. I feel so unable to affect policy and legislation and stuff as a researcher, because, well, I mean, climate change, is being currently unwound in the US. As there's no leadership in the world on this anymore, and that is something that will actually kill millions of people. Definitely in the next few years. So if policy isn't working in that field, there is an existential crisis that's going to kill us all. Well, okay. So what I'm focusing on is what I do have more agency over, which is my own direction of research, which is I'm trying to work more with those sources of evidence that we need more of. So that's the social scientists who can gather data on how safe you feel, so your perceived versus actual safety under lights. Those safety people who don't understand the safety concerns, and the criminologists and so on, coming together with ecologists and devising ways of testing lights and what's the impact, and working together in that sense, so that we can sort of put forward a more joined up perspective. But maybe that's it's pessimistic on the big scale, but at least there's something that I can do as a scientist, for the future.
Yeah. Well, I kind of wanted to move us to maybe to a more optimistic kind of close here, and then we can look at the Q some of the in the Q&A. I mean, what I mean, some have been shared, but what examples of success stories are there that give you hope that protecting natural darkness can become a mainstream environmental goal, right? I mean, it like and for me, there are stories all around the world, and that's one of the things that's inspiring about the Darkscape community. Again, I shared it last night, but Chris and I were in County Mayo, Ireland, and there is this church that has been relit. And yes, it has saved energy, and yes, it has reduced light pollution, but it is just beautiful, right? It is beautiful. So that there are these pockets of hope at a micro scale, and as Chris said, at the scale of France. So are there any other stories that kind of keep you going that you'd like to share?
So one of the things we can say, sort of watch this space. One of the things that I'm proposing to do with this nighttime lights remote sensing professorship is to try and understand the huge variability between different communities in different countries when it comes to light emissions. So per capita light emissions. So we know, for example, that the United States is about 3 to 5 times brighter, depending on the size of the city, per capita compared to German cities. So if American cities were lit like German cities, Germany's a safe, wealthy, prosperous country, then you would have like a third as much total light pollution. So it seems to me entirely possible to slowly move to that solution. And I think, part of the reason why our studies are finding that streetlights are no longer such a huge contributor is that we were really, as a community, we were really, really successful in convincing streetlight manufacturers and individual communities to switch away from these Cobra head fixtures to uh, lights that only shine downward, right? So if you look at a typical new installation of LEDs, the vast majority these days, I would say, at least the majority in any case, are full cutoff lights. This has become normal, I would say. And I think that the reason it became normal is not just because the technology allowed it, it's because this community pushed for it. So we have had one really big win. The problem is, we haven't had the win on avoiding the advertising lighting getting brighter and brighter, and this the headlight issue, which I got to see if I can find the link. This should be a scandal. Some headlights in North America, if you shine them on a white wall, you'll see a dark spot. And the dark spot is where the measurement device is to make sure that this is a legal headlight in the United States. So it's like the Volkswagen diesel scandal, right? They are intentionally darkening a portion of the field of view of the headlights in order to allow them to be marked as roadworthy. This is clearly against what the policymakers expect. So those kinds of things don't fly so well in Europe as they do in North America, right? So changing the rules in the United States about how bright headlights can be is a potential big win coming up, and it's a place where you probably can get a lot of public support because everybody can't stand these really, really bright headlights, at least when they're coming towards them. And if they couldn't buy them, if it was no longer possible to buy these headlights, it would make a difference.
Sam, do you have what gives you hope in terms of you study that you're out in the dark, you study darkness, you use darkness to apply your trade? What gives you hope about having it become a mainstream environmental goal, something that we care about?
Yeah, I mean, I know in astronomy, like there's so many amateur astronomy clubs that get out and show people the darkness and show people how beautiful the night sky is. And and that gives me hope, seeing so many people who care so much about it and are so willing to share their time to educate people. And no matter how bad things get in orbit, there will be some times of night at some times of year when the Earth's shadow blocks everything. So we will have some true darkness with no satellites that are being lit up flying through. So it's a very new problem, so it hasn't had time to like balloon into whatever is going to happen next yet. It's yeah, we're living it.
And Jolyon.
What gives me hope? Well, I love this France example. You know, this is evidence on a giant scale potentially that we will be able to actually get statistical evidence of the effect of dimming. City. So I'm not in Exeter. I'm down the road in Cornwall, but Exeter, they have dimmed the streetlights massively. Just because there's a few people in the council there who have just seen this as an issue, and they've taken up the challenge to just reduce light levels for across tens of thousands of people are being affected by these lower light levels, and they've had something like 9 responses from the public, of which 2 of them were vaguely negative, but not very negative. They just said, "Oh, I've noticed it's a bit darker." So you can halve the light levels in a city without anyone noticing. That gives me hope. That's good. And the other thing that gives me hope is always just taking my kids out in the darkness. And this is what I think Dark Skies is doing really well, is this just excitement of darkness. We go and find animals at night that you don't see in the day. You see the stars and you see all this stuff. So that excitement, that's always going to be a drive that we can draw on.
Well, please continue to drop your questions. We've got about just over 10 minutes left. Drop your questions in the Q&A, and I'll pick out a few of those. I think some of them have been covered, or elements of them being covered. Let me go up and scroll, see what we have. Catherine Carpenter, for want of a Jolyon. I'm curious, like, how do you get information about the car headlights, right? I think you've done some studies looking at how they've changed over time. Have been part of a group looking at that. What information does exist about what's being installed, beam angles, direction, spectrum, etc.? Where are you getting that information from in the studies and the descriptors that you had?
That's mostly I was lifting work that Kevin Gaston's lab did a while ago on this, but others have done more since. Actually involved, in their case, taking a spectrometer out and measuring the intensity of the car headlights. And the nice thing is, if you work on a university campus, well, it's full of cars of different ages and whatnot. So you can look at, particularly, students with beaten up ancient cars. So you can actually get a cross section of design, accounting for, the plastic changing and the yellowing and slightly and whatnot. But we know, the technology, this change from halogen to xenon, HID, now to LED. I mean, these changes are sort of very easy. We all notice them. They're things that we've seen changing on our roads. Their vehicle manufacturers also provide these data, and I'm working with someone at CIE who's linked with all these vehicle manufacturers in Europe, and so we hopefully have access to them. And now this allows us to model more accurately how a car moving through a different habitat type with different road verges, that whether you have hedges at the side of the road or fences changes how far the light will spread. So actually we haven't currently linked those detailed emissions data for headlights with the ecological stuff, but that's the kind of direction we're going in. They exist. We just don't really use them for much in our field at the moment.
I'm curious, as an extension of that, just on the headlight issue, you mentioned these as pulse sources, right? And clearly, if you're on a rural country road in Britain, maybe there's 2 or 3 cars per hour, and they're very much a pulse. Many of our roads are also either bumper to bumper and everything's stationary, or maybe the traffic's moving continuously at sort of 50 miles an hour down there. And I'm curious, at what point does it cross over from a pulse to actually something approaching continuous illumination, and how does that change the evaluation of the impacts? Well, I mean, that's a super good question. And
for example, when you're doing a dose response, so how much light does it take to cause a biological effect? It's quite easy with a streetlight because you can say, okay, well, suppose the animal is 10 meters, 50 meters away from the streetlight. We can simulate this intensity in the lab and see what happens. But you've just described, okay, so with vehicle headlights, we've got not only the intensity, but the duration of that pulse, the frequency, how many cars are passing, how bright they are, what spectrum they are. This is all changing. There are so many degrees of variation here. So designing experiments that can test this are therefore, the number of dimensions balloons in terms of the number of treatments you need. So we are trying to do this where we are simulating the number of different pulses and the intensity. So far, this is unpublished data, but it's looking like it fits a fairly standard dose response for the insect pupillary response. So more doses, so more cars but lower intensity, or just one car of very high intensity, they both have a similar-ish effect. But then you've also got the question of, so just a few cars, those are roads that are less, with less traffic on them. But in most road networks, they're the ones that extend most into the more ecologically sensitive areas, away from big population centers. So there are fewer cars, those pulses are more kind of discrete, but also they're in areas that are more vulnerable. So you've got to weigh the potential for ecological harm against the pervasiveness and against the number and intensity of pulses. So you can imagine how it's just difficult to work with. Maybe why there's been so little research into this area.
And then the last question on the sort of vehicle headlights thing, Liana Borkowski is asking about when you mentioned a moth recovers its vision. Maybe it takes hours or a night to recover its vision. Are there any long-term effects that extend beyond the point its vision has recovered in terms of maybe its ability to navigate or perceive, however it's navigated, whether it's the stars or the lines or whatever? Do you understand the long-term effects of that intense bright pulse once the vision has recovered?
Short answer, we don't know. We've done experiments that imply that they can be carryover effects the next day. So if the light that a moth receives at night is too perturbed, it can influence it, 36 hours later potentially. But these are kind of quite lab-based experiments. So how these extrapolate into a wild moth, we really have no idea. Imagine a moth that's just emerged from its crevice that it's been hiding in the day. It's just crawling up a bit of foliage, about to take off and find a mate, and then bam, hit by headlights. What does it do? Does it fly and hit the car? Does it crawl back down and say that's try again tomorrow? We just don't know. So there are a few labs evidence from the lab to suggest that these triggering their light adaptation with a single pulse can have effects that last hours, certainly, maybe into the next day that we can detect. But yeah, we can't translate that to ecological effects and population declines and so on at this stage.
Yeah, thank you. So Sam, there's a number of questions about what Reflect Orbital is doing and more broadly sort of sunlight as a service. And I'm going to take those and sort of extend it a little bit. There's a question about this, this is just kind of greenwashing, pointing at like, oh, this is not light pollution because it's just sunlight. And if I expand that a little bit, in the discussions I've been having with people in the conservation environmental community, the response is very much, oh, that's happening in space. It's cool. We love space. How could it possibly affect us of what's going on here? So I'm curious, how should we think about this? Space is the final frontier. It's something positive and it's wonderful, and it doesn't affect my daily life apart from bringing me good.
Yeah,
How do we change that narrative?
Yeah, and that's a big problem for everything that's happening in orbit. We don't think of space as an environment, even though all of those, there's what, 13,000 satellites in orbit, active satellites, and most of those are in low Earth orbit. Every single satellite in low Earth orbit will be burned up in Earth's atmosphere at the end of its life, and whatever doesn't get burned up will hit the ground, right? So this is this is a serious environmental issue because low Earth orbit is intimately tied to our atmosphere and our oceans and the land. It's not outside the Earth, right? So yeah, I think that like just talking about space as an environment, there's this whole space environmentalism movement that's starting up among astronomers who are seeing what's happening. This is the direction that we need to go. We just need to keep talking about it, and we need to talk about astronomy as space exploration too, right? Like we're exploring space with our telescopes from the ground. And these satellites that are in space are getting in the way of our space exploration, right? So that just there's some language shifts that can really help people to understand this connection better, I think. And a lot of people are working on that. So language is powerful.
Yeah, the other challenge I think we face there is every time the astronomers discover some cool new thing from the James Webb Telescope or talk about building a new telescope on the dark sky of the moon, it feels like the astronomy community has abandoned the Earth and all its problems and are just going to put themselves in space. And that
Right,
sort of
yeah.
feeds into the narrative
But
that we don't need these ground-based observations.
yeah,
So maybe you could just comment on the
yeah.
interplay and the importance of ground-based observations at a time that everything is also moving into space for the
Oh,
professional astronomy community.
yeah, and I mean that's like astronomy is looking up at the sky and noticing patterns and using those patterns to make predictions, right? And that is something that humans have been doing as long as we've been human, right? Like that connection. I feel like our eyeballs are the best tool for exploring space. And so much of our astronomy research, so much of this cutting edge research comes from ground-based telescopes. The James Webb Space Telescope is amazing and it's doing stuff that we cannot do from the ground, but it is $10 billion, right? We're not gonna get more of those. Like that's this a ridiculous cost. And we can't be fixed, right? Like it's out there. If something breaks, it's done. If something breaks on any other telescope on Earth, you can go and fix it, right? So I think it's really important to keep those facilities and to keep yeah, that they're doing important work. We can't yeah, it astronomers cannot just do work from space. Like there's no way we can do that. And like I said, I think just using your eyes is so important.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Sam. There's obviously a lot of interest in the chat as well about the example you shared, Chris, in France and what's going on in France. I'm curious, do you know, I mean, a couple directions here. Do you have any data or are you aware of any studies that look at the changes in light pollution and the crime statistics that you mentioned? Is that available? Is that being published? Is that a story that maybe we should be capturing and sharing? That's from there.
Yeah, there's a PhD student who's working on that now, I know of. So that's going to come out relatively soon. But when we think about the literature on light and crime and light and road safety, a lot of it assumes that there's a big impact. But it's very hard to do that work actually correctly. And a lot of work finds no effects, right? Or no measurable effect. Belgium, when Russia invaded Ukraine, they parts of Belgium turned off their highway lighting, which is a big deal because in Belgium all the highways had been lit for ages. Imagine that highway lighting actually did something for collision statistics. If that was true, then there would have been a huge increase in collisions, right? If there was a huge increase in collisions, then right-wing media would have been all over it. How could you do this crazy thing, turn off the lights? This hospital has had so many collisions now, has so many people in the hospital because of collisions. Similarly, in France, a third of the communities now shut the lights off late at night. If crime was reduced by 30% by street lighting late at night, then we would breaking, right? It would be in the right-wing news media, this crazy idea, turn the lights off has caused huge number of things. So the fact that this is not in the media in Belgium, it's not in the media of France, is the best demonstration of highway lighting. This is pretty much clear. Germany, the autobahns are not lit. People drive way faster than they do in North America. Highway lighting probably does nothing. And secondly, very late at night, turning lights off also does nothing because nearly everyone is sleeping. Um, So there's room to discuss what happens in the early evening, but you know, I've unfortunately forgotten what your question was now. But anyway, the fact that we don't see already in the media a huge outcry just demonstrates that actually the effect size is small,
Yeah.
which we knew from the careful studies already.
Yeah, well, we look forward to reviewing the study that comes out and sharing that with the dark sky community. So we're at time now. So I just wanted to thank each of you very much for spending part of my Saturday morning, your Saturday afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world. It's been I found it a fascinating discussion. I know it got pretty gloomy at some points, but I think we ended on a bright note, and that there's a lot to be do, lot that we can do. Right, we know a lot of the solution, notwithstanding the fact that we need more ecologists to be studying this. The solutions, as you said, are so simple. Like when you need it, where you need it, and just enough and not too much. Right, the solutions have not changed. Our challenge is how do we take those out to new communities. Just a couple notes for some of the stuff that Dark Sky will be doing coming up. Actually, with Yana Yakashima, one of our fantastic collaborators in Europe, we will be participating in a 2-hour side event at the Climate COP in Brazil on November 18th, discussing the impact, the light pollution and its intersection with climate. Alejandro Sanchez will be talking about some of his recent work of assessing the wasted energy and the climate impact of light pollution there. So that's coming up in November. And in December, I'm participating in a UN COPUOS square kilometer array week-long discussion in Vienna, looking at what is happening in low Earth orbit, bringing the satellite community with the astronomy community and the dark sky community together to discuss are there common paths forward to address these solutions. So, and then on Reflect Orbital, certainly when that filing goes public, we will be in touch with everyone and encouraging everyone to submit their comments. And I'd say that we did that recently with a comment the FCC. We had a huge response from our community, and 50% of the comments that were submitted to the FCC on that came from this community, and it was one of the most commented events on their docket at that point. So this is a community that's ready to mobilize, and that is wonderful and encouraging. So thank you for joining us. We went a couple minutes over, but I will hand it back to Chris if he wants to share anything in terms of what's next.
Thanks, Ruskin, and thanks so much, Chris, Sam, Joylan, for joining us today. Ruskin's right. We'll start transitioning into our next session. That'll start in about 13 minutes. So feel free to take a break, stretch your legs, refill that glass, and we will come back in 13 minutes with our America's Regional session featuring just a whole new slew of speakers. So we'll be right back.